Two, one. And hello and welcome to the Spiritual Gentleman podcast and for the ADHD men's group. This is the very first get to know an admin moderator. And I am here with the awesome and amazing and newest moderator of the team, Mr. Shane Thrapp. Welcome, Shane, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. So finally, we were able to do this. We tried a couple of times and we were finally able to connect. So Shane, what I would love to know about is, could you tell me a bit about your history and story with ADHD?
Yeah, I grew up in Northeast Texas in the South in the 80s and 90s, and mental health didn't exist at that time. A lot of people didn't really, you were just either crazy or you were normal, and so there was a lot of crazy people around me. My dad was, he was, for the most part, he was a good man, but he was an alcoholic and he was fairly abusive. He had carried over a lot of the pain and trauma from his childhood and abuse in his, and from a earlier marriage and things of that nature. And so, we never knew that I had ADHD. I was just always a very, odd child. My dad called me the smartest dumb kid he ever knew, and that was that caused a lot of issues for me because his way of disciplining me wasn't so much as a safe way to do it. It was there was a fist coming at me, or there was a belt coming at me. There was an electrical cord. Or one time when I was 13, I cursed while working on a car. I smashed my finger and I said shit. And I turned around and kind of like was doing the handshake thing, like trying to get the pain off. And all of a sudden, a hammer hits me in my back. And he's like, "Don't curse, goddammit." I'm like, "Oh, okay, Dad. Damn it, that hurts both sides of me now." Okay, so so my childhood was really crazy, but I was also being raised in a fundamentally religious community, and we went to this Southern Pentecostal church, and my the pastor was this fire and brimstone Old Testament. The women weren't allowed to wear regular clothes; they could only wear cotton clothes, cotton dresses. They weren't allowed to cut their hair. They weren't allowed to speak out against their husbands. If their husbands were abusing them and they tried to leave them, then they'd get excommunicated from the church. It was very strict. And I, I never really fit in anywhere because, again, I was neurodivergent in the South. And like when I was 11 years old, middle of church service, the pastor is talking about Noah's Ark and how all these people were killed because they didn't believe in God and they were all sinners and everything. And then like I went to like whisper up to my Graham, and I was going to it's like, why is God such an asshole? But the problem is he had hit this point of his sermon where he wanted to get the crowd to say, "Oh, amen, hallelujah." And so he had gone silent and nobody had said anything. And so here's this 11-year-old kid whispering, "Why is God such an asshole?" And he heard me, and so did like multiple other people around me, and everybody just kind of looked at me, and like the organ kind of kind of stops for a second, and so he recovered for a second. He stomps down to the middle of the aisle, grabs me by my arm, and drags me up. Starts calling for the elders of the church to come, and then they spend an hour of the church service like spraying me down with holy oil and holy water and screaming in tongues over me, and so it was a really horrifyingly traumatic experience for me. And I can see the humor of it now, but at the time it was like, holy shit. So
That's traumatic. That's
yeah,
really traumatic because you made a valid point.
it's like a really rude thing to do to people, like killing off all these people. And so I learned very early on that I had to mask. I didn't know I had ADHD. I just knew that I was very different from the people around me. So I built this mask of all the popular people I knew and all the people who seemed really kind of normal. But it never really worked. I always was kind of on the outside looking in. And that's because that mask that people wear, that kind of Frankensteinian mask that people wear, causes red flags to go off because you're not being authentically who you really are. And so I wore those masks for years and years. And it wasn't until my son was from my first marriage was diagnosed with ADHD. Well, he wasn't diagnosed. His teachers and the school counselor said, "Hey, we believe your child has ADHD and they need to be tested." And so he was tested and he was eventually diagnosed, but his mother didn't believe in mental health, so she didn't do anything about it. But I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to understand what ADHD was, and I wanted to understand like how to help him, how to provide for him, and things of that nature, because we had done a lot of damage to him and his sister when my ex-wife and I got divorced. And so I had been trying to like really start being more in their lives and be more involved and really trying to make sure that I was doing what I thought was best. And so the more I started learning about ADHD, the more I started going, I deal with a lot of this, and I'm okay. Yeah, bouncing from job to job is a thing that I do all the time, and I'm really good at some things. And geez, if you get me on a certain subject, I'm going to learn everything I can about it. Wow, I did really good in school, except for when I was bored and I slept all the time. But I had already read the school book at that point, so I kept making really good grades. So here I am reading all these different symptoms and how people deal with them. And I was just like, okay, wow, I think I have ADHD. But at that time, and this is 10 years ago, and this is kind of me exploring this over, a couple of years and stuff like that. ADHD was still considered really bad, right? You It was very negative. There's a very negative stigma against having ADHD or being neurodivergent, and so I didn't want to tell people I had ADHD. But once I met my wife, who is a special needs teacher, and she and I started really talking about things, she really opened my eyes up to what that really meant, and how people could process their ADHD. And so then I started really learning more about it, and then what kind of um, I don't want to say, well, there are positives to it, but what I started understanding about ADHD was the ADHD does help you in a number of different ways, but because of how we're raised in this environment in our society that places so much emphasis on a status quo of what they feel is a normal. So our parents have this idea of what a normal child should be and how they're supposed to act, and our teachers have this expectation of how a child is supposed to act in this classroom, and your peers who
Even
have
the whole
people
education system, right? Like the
right.
rows, like it's these, all right, we're going to go rows like this. You're going to learn the
Mhm.
same thing. You're going to have to verbatim, like this answer leads to this one. It's this very linear kind of thing because we want to
Right,
make you a factory worker, right? Like
right.
that's,
It's and also like if you learn slower than others, then you're failing, if you're not able to keep up with your peers, and you're failing, right? And or if you're really ahead of your peers in certain subjects, they're like, okay, you need to be in this thing, or you need to be in these AP classes, and that's great and everything, but that puts more expectations, more unrealistic expectations on me to always be good, to always be super smart. But there's so much times when that kind of dies off, right? Like, and you're not able to do as much, and so so you kind of have this yo-yo effect of meeting and exceeding these very unrealistic expectations, but then not being able to keep up with it because of having ADHD. And so, our system doesn't help people like us, and it hurts us a lot. And so a lot of the problems that we wind up having with ADHD are the comorbidities that come with it: depression, anxiety, imposter syndrome, rejection sensitivity dysphoria. All of these different things that come along with it cause us, from the trauma that we've dealt with all of our lives, And the lack of the ability to use our ADHD and learn how to use the hyper focus, learn how to use the intensity that we have in learning the different passions that we develop and all of those things. We don't learn how to harness those until we get to a point where we already now our neuroplasticity is very, very low and dramatically reduced. And so, as an adult who finally got diagnosed with ADHD and got to a point where I was getting therapy and seeing a psychiatrist and getting medication, and that way, I was just like, okay, no, this isn't going to work. I need to know as much about ADHD as possible, because then I had found out that it's hereditary. And, now I have twin 2.5-year-olds, and I said, okay, I'm going to start like now creating this environment around them of honesty and trust, and learning how to communicate with them and learning how they're trying to communicate with me, and then trying to find those happy middle grounds. And so that's kind of where I got to, at this point, personally speaking, was going through all of these different trials and tribulations. Like my ex-wife and I were just, we were never good for each other. We should have never gotten married. But again, religious upbringing, I was back in the church. I was, we had been together for a little while. She had gotten pregnant, and of course, and she's pregnant, I've got to be a responsible man, and then marry her and have this child together, and eventually a second child with her. But we should have never been married. We should have just co-parented and gone our separate ways. And those are mistakes that you make, but you also learn from them, and you have to take the lessons that you do develop and build up that resilience that you get from adversity, and then hopefully
love that word, resilience, right? I love that
right.
word. That is such a great word. And I love especially what you're talking about with your twins too, right? Because that's what you're teaching them, is resilience, right? You have to kind of teach them to live in this world that is not made for neurodiverse people, right? Like
Right.
you are the square peg, and these are round holes that you have to negotiate yourself through, and you have to like learn how to work through it. I think that's absolutely amazing. Oh, please, I'm sorry, I just continue.
No, and that's fine, because if you don't interrupt me, I'll go on a 4-hour tangent about everything else. No, but what I really learned from that was, whenever I was going through that relationship with my ex-wife, and we were getting to this point when my first son was 4, my first daughter was 1.5. I was trying to be a good dad, but I was working a whole lot because my ex-wife wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I wanted to support her. So I was working 80 to 100 hours a week. And so when I was at home, I was really stressed out, and I was in a lot of pain. I was always tired, and I was falling into the habits of what I had learned how to act towards my kids that my dad did to me, and that my mom did to me. And so there was a lot of, I was continuing that cycle of abuse that we fall into, especially as survivors. And my son looked at me one day, and I yelled at him, and I spanked him, and then my daughter had kind of looked at me, and she had shrank away from me, and I broke down, man. Like I literally, I shattered into a million pieces at that point, because I realized that I was my dad, right? I had fallen into that trap. And so there was a lot of really hardcore self-reflection.
Would you say that was like your kind of almost that rock bottom kind of moment of that kind of moment of where you're like, especially I know from being a recovering alcoholic, it's that stage of where somebody see that kind of moment, you're like no, like especially like I'm not going to fall into these patterns, and then you're like, then you don't even realize that you had fallen into these patterns, right? Like it had become so the subconscious that, and to break that programming in that, because it's generational, right? It's not just
Right.
from you or your father, it's from his father and his father before him. And to break that, that's, I applaud you for knowing that and to breaking the cycle. That's an amazing thing to do. That's because it's hard.
Right. And like even now, like I mean, this is 15 years later, and even now, I look back at it, and all that shame and all that pain and all that stuff really hits me, and it hurts. But I just kind of keep holding on to the lessons that I learned from that point. Was I'm not going to allow myself to fall into that habit. I'm not going to allow myself to be that person. I'm not going to continue that cycle of pain that I was raised in. And so from that point, I really started focusing on how to be a parent, right? How to be a good parent, how to deal with the stressors and stuff like that. And so then, again, once a few years later, after the divorce and things of that nature, and I started really learning how to co-parent and try to make sure that we were doing our best to heal the trauma from the divorce that was happening to my kids. So mental health became super important for me. And then of course my ADHD kicked in, and I started hyper focusing on mental health, and I started hyper focusing on ADHD, and I've never stopped, right? I've never stopped reading about them, and I've never stopped learning about how to process things and how to help people. And the only thing that, I always had this desire to go to college and become a therapist and or a counselor, or learn about psychology, but I couldn't bring myself to put myself back into that system of having to learn all of these extraneous subjects that didn't mean shit to me, right? I don't care about mathematics and physics and those things. I don't care about any of that. If it's not science, mental health, or therapy, or about ADHD, or these things right here, the things I care about, I don't have the patience nor the time to learn that shit. I also don't have the money to waste on college either, because my finances have never been good, even though I've always been in jobs where I was some sort of manager or leader or things of that nature. Just by my imposter syndrome wants me to say that it was luck. It was just because I was really fucking good at whatever I enjoyed doing. And
Exactly,
so
you were passionate, right? Because passion leads into being strong leaders, because people will follow someone who's passionate, who believes it. Like, will follow the cheerleader versus the sad mope, right? It's like,
right.
all right, guys, we're gonna do it, versus the, hey guys, you want to do it? Like, like, who are you gonna follow? And especially with, and I love what you're saying too, particularly about knowing what's in your box, right? Knowing what's in your passions box, right? Knowing what you love to do and love to talk about, and sticking there, right? Like, there are many things that I'm not good at, and I'm going to outsource. I've learned, I read the 4-Hour Work Week, so I try to outsource. If I don't know it, I'm either going to learn about it or associate it. For me, I associate everything back to a recipe or to food, because for me, of how I had to learn. So a bit about my story is that when I was diagnosed at 9, by 12, an incident happened with abuse and trauma of a bully, that led me to trying to OD on my Ritalin pills. Took like 30 or 40. And then I went through this binging stage from 12 to about 15. At 15, I found cooking. And once I found cooking, I realized I'm a textile learner. I have to be physically in the moment there doing it. And I needed all that stimulation around me to keep me focused. And, no one wants their meal late. So you have to be on it to get it done. There'd be all these things going on, and I could master and like zone in on it. And that was how I learned. Up to 15, I said I didn't learn anything. I successfully failed my primary school. I successfully failed high school, and I'm a college dropout. So I have been very successful in my failures of like knowing, but I've also learned how to find my own path. And like yourself, I think especially mental health, and I think mental health with, I think, men's mental health, right? I find we don't talk about it enough, right? Like, the idea of the man is the you only cry at the baseball game when your team wins, right? Like the only time you get to show, we called my dad the man of steel. Now that I'm learning more about ADHD and neurodiversity, I think my dad has like a slight either Asperger's or autism. The way he kind of does things, I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see this because it is genetic. And he's been able to, he's now in his 70s and he's lived a very happy life, but I can tell like when things don't go right, it's like I'm like, all right, I'm starting to see these things like that. Now I have more compassion for him than I would have when I was younger. I would love to hear more about how you, especially when your first son, and how you handle your daughters. Now, do you have any tips for like parents out there of how to handle like their kids with? Because I know we have a lot of parents in the group of how you handle like your kids with ADHD or meltdowns and things like that.
Yeah, so one of the first things I really learned, especially with my first son, was to understand that the behaviors that he was showing, the behaviors that my children are kind of exhibiting, that were of the frustration and the outbursts and the attention-seeking behaviors, were because we weren't learning how to communicate with them, and we weren't learning how they wanted to communicate with us. We weren't learning how they were trying to communicate with us. And so what I tell people now is like, you have to build this environment around your children that's based on honesty and trust and communication, and not just in how you speak to your kids, but learning how they're trying to speak to you. And sometimes it's not always verbal, right? Sometimes they don't have the words to say the things that they want. They don't have the vocabulary to express how they're feeling. They don't have the knowledge to know how they feel. They just feel this way. And so the first thing that I tell people is to kind of learn how your child is trying to communicate with you. Another thing I tell them is, especially if they learn that they have ADHD and their child has ADHD, or is on the spectrum, don't feel shame for that. Don't feel bad because you think that you gave them some sort of disease or illness or something along those lines. You can't help what your genetics are. You can't help what your life was like before now, right? You can only go forward into your future and then do your best to try to be better. And so part of that is getting rid of the shame that you feel if if you're a parent of a child with ADHD, because you don't want your children to see you feeling that shame and then think it's because of them, right? You don't
Right.
want
And
you
and
don't
you may not verbalize that shame, but it will come across in your body language because kids can pick up all the subtle, like you said, 99, what, like 85% of all communication is nonverbal, right? Or like, so as I think it's 75, I'm not exactly sure the right percentage, but
right.
majority of it is nonverbal. And especially with kids, right? They're going to pick up how you're acting and how you're holding. So if you're feeling kind of like, oh my God, they're going to feel like that shame, because I felt that from my parents a little bit when I was diagnosed. I was the first kid in my grade school to be diagnosed. So and then I put all this shame on myself of like, I'm the first kid and then I'm in all these special ed things and this is like, so I must be less than. And one of the ways I've
Right.
had to now review, or how I change how I view ADHD now, is like neurotypical people, they're like the PC or the Mac, and we're the Linux. Like that's how I like to be. Like the hardware is a little bit different, and the software ends up, but it just gives us a different experience. So I don't look at it as this I'm less than. I'm just a different form of human being. A different model.
Right. And you know, I'm not trying to promote this man because he's got some wackadoodle stuff about him, but his name is Tom Hartman, and he wrote a book called ADHD, a Hunter in a Farmer's World. And I thought I think it's a fascinating hypothesis on, you know, how to explain ADHD as not a disability, as not an illness, as not a mental deficiency. It's just our brains are wired differently, like you said. And I took that and I was just like, man, that's a really great way to think about this. you know. We do have to acknowledge the disabilities that come with it, the comorbidities from like depression, anxiety, and things of that nature. But that's separate from the ADHD in my eyes, because that is because of how our social circles were growing up and what are the unrealistic expectations that we were being held to, and being expected to keep up with our peers or always keep up this amazing grades, and that or if we didn't, we were failures, and treating those failures as horrible bad things. And I really enjoyed learning about we how to how to think about my ADHD as, just this is how my brain works, and that's okay. Like, I needed to learn that it was okay to be different, because like, and I've posted this a number of times in a group. There's no normal, right? Normal is a myth. Like, everybody is different. Everybody thinks
Normal and
differently.
perfect, right? These two
Right,
words that we use that really don't mean anything, right? Like
right.
we've created this thing that what is normal, right? Like that is
It's an ideal that people want us to be able to fit all in this one box of who we are supposed to be, but it ignores the fact that some people think differently, and some people are wired differently, but also ignores that we change over time, right? I grew up in a community that was literally all white people, right? And I went to a school that was all white students. And my cousins went to a school from elementary to high school that was all white students. And so my community, most of my family is very racist, you know. But once they got older and they started, obviously learning, some of them stayed racist because, well, this shit, they're racist. And but some of them started learning, and so like now I have a metric ton of cousins who are all mixed. So it's just like, oh, okay, that happened, but like society trying to force us into this box of who we are growing up as, and the expectations that are being trying to be forced on us. Like,
it's funny too because it's like, oh, we want you to all fit in this box, but it's okay for you to be a special and unique flower as long as you fit in the box, right?
right.
It's this contradictory thing of like, yes, be a unique special flower, but as long as you stay within the lane and in the box, you're okay. But as soon as you go outside that box, you're like, which is like, wait a minute, but then
Look, I'm a very special flower, kind of like a fern, not so much a rose. So, like, so so what I really try to do now is try to break that mindset of trying to fit into a normal, right? Trying to fit into these unrealistic expectations, and just be as authentic to who you are as possible. Because what that's going to do is it's going to drive away the people who you don't actually want in your life. And even if that's family members, it's fine, because what you want are the people who are going to be in your life who are there for you, the authentic you, because otherwise you're inviting a lot of toxicity in your life. And so what, you know, kind of going into what got me into coaching was, I have been studying relationships for so long. And then that was kind of like, that's tangentially related to ADHD, because my relationships never really lasted that long, right? Most of my relationships are 6 months and done. Of course, I've been married twice now, and I've been with my wife for 10 years now. But all those relationships before were just me bouncing around from person to person, because eventually the new relationship energy dies off, the honeymoon period dies off, and now I'm being fairly neglectful to these people I'm with, and they're not able to keep up with it. And so what I work on now as a life coach and as a relationship coach, and as a person whose background is in ADHD, is helping people kind of understand that they have to remove the mask and be as authentic as they can be, so that they can have the people in their life who are going to be beneficial and care about them for who they are, and understand the pain and the trauma that they've gone through, and the ongoing struggle it means to have ADHD and all the comorbidities that come with it. And so that comes from being honest and everything, means starting literally with your dating profile on whatever thing is, or how you introduce yourself to people, because you don't introduce yourself as who you are. You introduce yourself as this ideal that you think women or men are looking for, and that causes a lot of pain, because once the person starts really seeing who you are and they get to know you, there's a dissonance that starts hitting there.
Yeah.
And if anybody has trauma in their life, or sexual abuse survivors or something like that, that dissonance means that you're fake, and that means you're dangerous. And if you keep trying to be this good guy and being this person that, you may be a good guy and everything as long as that's concerned, but if you keep trying to hold on to this ideal of what you think a good guy is supposed to be, and you're not authentically being who you are, you become like this weird creepy guy. And you
And
deal
so many
with.
guys fall into that, not even just with ADHD, right? So many guys fall into this of like, I have to create this projection as the nice guy or as this thing, instead of kind of finding themselves. Because this is something that I like yourself, particularly in my 20s, like this is like my fiance is the longest relationship I've ever had. Because I knew that, okay, after about 6 months, about 2 to 3 months, I know the relationship was going to end, because I would get bored. And so I planned it out that way. And I also was like, you're the mistress to my restaurant, because I'm more obsessed about my restaurant than I am about you. So this is what like, and so when I learned, when I worked with a dating coach, was learn how to get to the know faster, learn how to be authentically. If I am whole myself, that radiates out. I don't have to go searching for anything. They come to me. I don't have
Right.
to go find, like, because I'm putting myself in environments of where this is where I found my partner. I was doing a laughter yoga workshop, and then after that there was her workshop, and my workshop would sometimes go 5 minutes long, and she would get mad at me and yell at me, and that's how we met.
um yeah, and so as I kind of started getting into the whole relationship side of things, I started having to also approach something that I didn't realize I dealt with. And I had learned about it, I had heard about it, but that was rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And so I would really lose my shit if anybody rejected me. And, you know, I didn't really go down the path of of like a lot of the super bad things that you see on the interwebs and stuff like that, like 94 messages, why aren't you listening to me, why aren't you talking to me, you fucking whore, you slut. I never went down that path, but I see those people, and I recognize what's going on there, of because these people have been rejected so many times, not just in dating and everything, but their parents never accepted who they were, their teachers never accepted who they were, their peers never accepted who they were. So they started wearing these masks of people that they thought were super popular. But again, because these masks aren't who our authentic self is, you still keep failing in these relationships, and you still keep getting singled out and things of that nature. And so then you start
You also
becoming
wonder
super.
why it keeps failing too, because
Right.
you can't recognize that you're wearing the mask, because the self has a hard time recognizing self in the mask. And so you could
Right.
like, and so you could have that pattern interrupt to break away, and like, oh, that's okay, that there's the mask, right? But it takes a lot of self-awareness, and I think self-love, right? I think getting to
Right.
it, right? When you talk about relationships, the first like person I really had to date was myself, right? If I didn't
Hmm.
have that self-love and that starting that relationship here, how can I go outward on it? And it's one of the questions I ask a lot of my clients, as well, is like, do you love yourself? It's and people seem to get blown away by this question, but it's a really simple one, but it's a really profound one, because when 90, like I'd say 80% of the guys I talk to say no, they don't love themselves. They don't know what that means. They're not sure. And I find it heartbreaking. I don't know if you have that kind of experience or something similar.
I do. I don't ask that question, and I'm going to add it to my repertoire now. What I do is I ask people what they think about themselves, because I kind of want to get I kind of want to get a feedback on um, how they feel about themselves when we first start, like, and then like on down the road as we keep going through the first month, the second month, the third month, into the sixth month. Uh, I keep checking in on them, and what I'm looking for is this pattern of growth of, hey, tell me something that's really cool about yourself, or tell me something that you're really happy with about yourself. And I want to see them being able to sit here and start really getting passionate about themselves, and not just telling me about their wins and things like that, but also how they're feeling about whatever goals that they have and whatever passions that they're starting to follow. And that allows me to kind of say, okay, hey, maybe we need to sit down and talk about, because you're not really, I want to make sure you're getting the value from what I'm teaching you, so that you're not, we're not stagnating. We want to keep moving up. We want to keep moving forward. We want to be, keep creating the order from the chaos that you've been dealing with. And when I kind of go through that at certain points, I see the self-love start to happen, because that's what I keep telling them. Like, hey man, you gotta love yourself. You gotta sit here and talk good about yourself. I had one client, and actually I saw this like literally in a group earlier, of a dude sitting here saying, I'm a shit human being, da 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 da. I didn't, because I forgot to do the dishes. And I've had a client who was telling me all this negative things about himself, because of, this is the stuff that he's heard from his parents, and this is the stuff he's heard from his teachers, this is the stuff he's hearing from his spouse. And I stopped him. I was like, man, you've got to stop. You've got to learn how to know who you are, and you need to figure out how to love yourself, because you're going to find yourself miserable if you don't. And you've got to reject the people around you who are abusing you and causing you trauma like that. And I don't care if it's your spouse, I don't care if it's your parents, I don't care if it's your siblings. You've got to get those people out of your lives after, if they're abusing you. And then
And it's
from
the
that point,
boundaries, right? And it's
right,
so
you've got to
hard.
set those boundaries.
And it's so hard with the ADHD, because it's that people please, like, not like, we get that people pleasing of like, oh, because you, and it's that craving of love, because you're not giving it like happiness, or like, it's an inside job, right? We try to take outside sources to fill the inside hole. But the only way to fill, like for me, right, the only way to fill that inside
Hmm.
hole is on the self work that I have to do. And for me, it's a daily basis thing, right? I have to work on a daily. I have a phrase that says, I am worth it and worthwhile. And I read that every day. And it seems like, oh, you seem to be so better now. But I have to constantly reprogram my mind versus I'm a loser. And like, I used to have I found one of my old notebooks when I went home back to Seattle a few years ago. And it was heartbreaking, because it was in there. I was like maybe 6 or 7. Nobody loves me, everybody hates me, I'm the worst person. And this is like pages upon pages that I wrote this. And it's just like, now thinking back on it, like, what was I doing with my neuroplasticity but setting in these patterns that I am a loser when I know I'm not, right? Like, but it's like I had to reprogram that, and the way I had to do that was to find that mantra to really adjust and change it. And it's something that I still struggle with. I'll be
Right.
honest. I almost gave up my coaching business a few weeks ago. I had a down point of like, what am I doing? I don't know if this, like, it's not having any value. And then the next week it was like, no, if I really believe this, I got to go all in. I know I can, like, if I truly believe in my heart of hearts, right? Like, my part of my I ams, one of my missions, right? I have vision boards, and I find vision boards. I kind of want to actually do like an ADHD vision board thing. So I think vision boards could be helpful, because I look at mine all the time,
It's just
and it's
97 pictures of everything that you're passionate about.
exactly. But your eye will pick up on all those things. But if you
Mhm.
constantly are reinforcing it, it helps. And like, I had to, like, all right, I have to reinforce if I want to believe this. If, like, for me, service, right? I was a Boy Scout, I was a chef. Everything is for me in service. So how can I be of service to people? And so I switched it from how do I make money to how can I be of service? And that mindset shift switched from looking at myself as negative, as I'm failing at business, to I am serving and I'm doing the best I can and I'm actually going forward. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and that's, my mantra for myself is there is no normal, right? And we were talking about this earlier. Like, there is no normal. Stop looking for the normal. Be who you are and be happy with that person because he's amazing, right? Another one is like, it's okay to live a life that's different that people don't understand. It's okay to be different, and I keep telling myself that over and over again. And we have to, because that's part of fighting the imposter syndrome that so many of us deal with. And this imposter syndrome of that we're never good enough, we're never, going to, and it goes hand in hand with the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Like, we're never good enough, we're never going to be worthy. Every success that we have is based on luck. Everything that we do is because, we are just trying to get by. And if anything good happens to us, it's not because we did anything, it's because of the circumstances around us. And so I had to look back at my career and go, all right, I became a manager, I became a operations manager, I became a project manager, not because I just fell into those roles, but because I showed people that I could do that job and I excelled at that job and I kept getting recognition for the work that I was doing because people kept coming to me as a subject matter expert. They kept coming to me as a person who understood the process better than everybody else. And I didn't have a degree, right? And so I'm sitting here making this really good money with no degree because I fought tooth and nail and did the work that needed to be done to learn the processes and to, improve them and keep improving them until they started saving money and I started showing, being able to touch those budgets and bring them down dramatically. And so I had to back at my entire career and say, okay, I did all of this, right? I mentored people. I brought people up. I was never the leader who took credit for my people underneath me's work. I always said, this person's done an amazing job and they deserve a raise. They deserve a promotion. We need to bring those people up, because what I wanted was to create this environment where everybody around me went up and I went up with them because my teams did amazing work. And so that kind of and then that kind of fed into what I wanted to do as far as a life coach is I want to help people who are at a certain point bring themselves up. And there's a selfish reason why I do that, because every time I do that, it allows me to reject the imposter syndrome. It allows me to sit here and self-affirm my worth, and it allows me to keep moving forward and up myself because I'm doing good deeds, I'm doing good work, and I'm changing people's lives for the better. And so the more people's lives who I can touch, even if I'm not getting paid, the more people's lives I can touch, the better my life will be, because I will be able to die and be very happy that I've raised children who are healthy, happy, and loving, and amazing people who can survive a zombie apocalypse, right? I'm helping people who have been rejected all of their lives for the things that they had no control over. And I'm teaching them things about how to have healthy relationships and build relationships based on trust and communication and honesty. And I'm improving these people's lives, even if it's for the short time that we're together. And one of the things that I've really had to learn along the way, and I this is painful for some people because nobody wants to hear this. And this is kind of a sharp segue, but it's part of the relationship thing that I really want people to start learning about. And that's to understand when the relationship needs to be over. Like, we kind of touched on it a little bit. When you're being abused by the people around you and you're in a relationship that's abusive towards you, and that person's not willing to do the work to help understand you or to go to therapy with you or to understand the disabilities that you have to deal with, then that person doesn't need to be in your life. And when we're talking about rejection sensitivity and we're talking about imposter syndrome and we're living with these people who continuously put us down or continuously argue with us and tell us that we're not worthy, you're causing trauma to yourself. And you need to do what it takes to make it where you are doing the best you can for yourself. And if you've got kids in a mix and they're seeing their father or they're seeing their mother abused, then that's trauma that's being piled on top of them. And so one of the things that I really have to deal with, and I've had to deal with this a few times in some of the relationships sessions that I've been working with people, is like, hey, you can either stay miserable for the next 10 years because that's what you think the society considers a successful relationship, is how long you've been together, or you can admit to yourself and to your spouse and to the people around you that this relationship is not healthy, and you need to be able to learn how to walk away from that, so that that person can in communicating why you're walking away from it, because that allows that person that you're with to recognize that there's something wrong with the way that they're doing things, and maybe get their own help on their own so that they can live healthily. And it allows you to move on and get out from underneath the abuse and the struggle that you're dealing with, and gain the self-love that you need to be healthy as well. This person, after that point, that person can go away and they can do whatever they want to do with their life, right? They're not dragging you down. They're not the albatross around your neck. They can go do whatever they need to do. And if they choose not to make themselves better, then that's on them. But you can control yourself. You can control the environment that you're in, and you can control what you want to do with your life. And you don't have to live with abuse. You don't have to live with somebody who constantly puts you down. And sometimes you just need to recognize that, because once you do that and they start healing and you start healing, that relationship may come back around. And it may not be a romantic relationship, but it may be a co-parenting friendship, or it may just be a friendship, right? And
it can leave it off on a positive note, right? You gain something from the relationship. Like even in my relationship with my fiance, just right after the pandemic kind of started, she comes from a very kind of abusive kind of home and a lot of trauma. And because I'm new to kind of a long-term relationship, and this also, like right at the beginning of the pandemic, we're living in a studio apartment. So you're in like this small kind of space. And a lot of this was coming up. We were also doing The Artist Way. I don't know if you know that book. It's basically it's like a self-help kind of thing about kind of helping you break artist blocks, but in one of the exercises they have is you write out 3 pages in the morning to get out all your thoughts. And as she was kind of going through this, she was going stuff with her father back in England, who was kind of harassing her, and it was coming out into the relationship where we almost broke up. It came down to a really like, look, we like, I can't be in this anymore. And I had to kind of, it was really hard because it was that rejection sensitivity of like, oh, no one else is going to ever love me again. But it's like, no, you know what? If we're not willing to make some changes and like really work on this, you asked me to make some changes. Now I'm going to ask you the same thing. If you're unwilling to work on it, then I have to walk away. We were able to talk it out and work through it. And now we're stronger than ever. But, but we go through this, there are times where in our relationship, we've had maybe 3 or 4 major kind of like at that decision point of like, do we walk away or not? And like, and we had to both kind of go to our own corners and ask, what do we want? Right? Not what the other person wants. What do I want? And do I want to have this relationship? Do I want to build, we were very honest about she was very honest with me at the beginning of like, I want to have a house. I want to have kids. At the beginning, I was like, I don't date. I am an international traveling chef man. I have lovers in all these countries kind of thing. That was my whole kind of thing. Because what I was looking for was a best friend I could be naked with that would be willing to travel the world with me. By naked, I mean mentally, physically, emotionally, and all like someone that I could connect soul to soul with. And I know to ask someone to drop their life and go travel the world with me is a big ask that I wouldn't ask out of anyone. But she was like, you know what, I may not be able to do that, but I'm willing to compromise. Are you willing to compromise with me? And she was someone I was willing to compromise with. And like, all right. And now we've built a life together, and we're still going to do traveling now that the world's opened up again, because she wants to travel. And so I've helped kind of bring things out of her, of like giving her the, as my mom calls it, roots and wings. She had the roots, I have the wings. So she's teaching me about roots, I'm teaching her about wings. So it's one of those things where we're finding the balance of like,
Mm-hmm.
but there are times where I'm like, you know what, it should be like, I need my space now. I'm like, okay, cool, I need my space now. Like, and knowing that we have to work on ourselves. I can't depend on her for her, my happiness, and she can't depend me on for her for my happiness, if that makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
and you touched on the best way to go about things. I use this analogy. Relationships are kind of like a delicious food that you love, right? You can have this relationship with this food and really enjoy it every time you eat it and everything like that. But if you store it up in the cabinet and you just kind of forget about it and you don't pay attention to the expiration date, then it's going to get toxic and nasty and you can't keep going on it. And so that's kind of where relationships, like you can have a lot of fun for as long as the relationship is enjoyable, but at some point if the relationship starts going bad and it's becoming toxic, you have to understand that you need to be done with that relationship. And that doesn't matter if the relationship is a one night stand or 3 weeks or 6 months or a year or 10 years or 50 years. It doesn't matter as far as length is concerned. It's the journey together that is the most important part of it. And if you get to a point where you've changed so much and they've changed so much that the differences between you are irreconcilable, if you started at the very beginning with an open and honest and environment where communication is key and trust is key, and you can go to your partner and talk to them about stuff and they can come to you and talk to them about stuff, and you're not going to get really judged for what you're discussing, then when you get to a point in the relationship where it's getting painful, like what you talked about, then you can sit here and say, hey, I'm going to go to my corner and I'm going to try to figure out how I feel about this, and you go to your corner and we'll come back together and we'll talk about this and see where we go from here. If you get to that point and the differences are too much and you separate at that point, then y'all can start healing. But if you keep trying to keep the relationship together and try to fight through these irreconcilable differences, and I don't mean, oh, hey, you don't do the dishes enough, or I don't mean the small stuff. I mean like
Fundamentals.
adultery,
Yeah.
right? Like the really hardcore ones. If you get to those points and the differences are too irreconcilable, and you keep trying to stay together, then you're doing nothing but building up bitterness. You're doing nothing but creating a toxic environment. You're doing nothing but hurting yourself, the people around you, and the person that you're with. You're causing pain, and that's trauma that you're adding to everybody around you, especially if you have kids, that is you don't need to have. And so if you get to the point where the relationship really needs to be over and then you step away, then things don't get so bad and it's easier to heal and come back together. And or at least as friends, or maybe as amicable parents, that's kind of where you have to go as far as relationships is concerned. And so that's kind of like where my coaching comes from, is like understanding how ADHD works in your brain, how it works in your relationships, and how to process and build this environment so that you can thrive without having um, to have like a 5-step program or anything like that. We work together on your own issues and go through and figure out the process that you need that works
Customize it,
everything
right?
out. Yeah,
We,
it's got to be
we
customized.
customize everything. I can customize my PC. I can customize my phone. Why can't I customize my own life, right? Like we can
Right.
customize whatever, but like for life, we seem to like, no, it has to follow the strict pattern, but we can customize everything else. Why not customize our life, right? Like that is
Right.
the
Yeah, like so you talked about a vision board. Like
okay.
for me, a vision board is just something that's going to stick up on the wall and I'm never going to look at it again, right? But my Evernote tells me, hey, you've got these tasks to do today, and one of them is check out your calendar. Okay, cool. This is another thing is like read through your past day's notes and see if there's anything that needs to be organized. Another one is like, hey, here's your goals. Make sure you're paying attention to your goals. And I can look at my Evernote and click and go, okay, cool. All right, goal, check, check, check. And I get a little dopamine rush, like, yeah, got that done. But that doesn't work for everybody. Some people need a journal, like like a paper journal that they write everything out in, and some people need
I do a self-love jar. So when I finish off a task, I throw some coins in here so that when I fill it up, and then once I get enough, I'll put it into buying more Lego.
And so, right, that's an amazing way to do things. And so
I don't think it would work for anyone else, but it works for me. But that's the important thing, right? What works for me. I don't care about anybody else. They don't live my life. I live my life.
Right. And so when I'm working with my clients and everything, one of the things that I do is like, hey, what are you really passionate about? Like when you want to award yourself something, when you have those impulse buys, what do you want to get? And we find those things, and it's like, okay, there's your rewards for when you do stick to your schedule. There's your rewards when you do knock off that check mark. Here's your rewards for when you do that thing. And that does two things. It stops the impulse buys a little bit. It doesn't, like, it's not 100% effective, but it stops those impulse buys because they can sit here, and if they have that reminder that they see in front of them, the jar, when that gets full, I can buy something with, they can sit here and say, okay, I'll put that in my wish list, right? And then I'll come back to it. Of course, then we can forget about it, and then we can surprise ourselves. Another thing, like, this is my personal technique for when I'm trying to remember to get people gifts. I ask questions throughout the year about things that people like and stuff like that. And so when I get that real hardcore itch to buy something, I have this list of gifts for birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, and I can sit here and say, okay, I may buy myself something, but I also have to spend money on this gift, this gift, this gift. And then I get the gift, I wrap it up immediately, and then I forget about who it is, but I've written the name of who's on it and everything. But so whenever we open the gifts at the Christmas time or birthday, I have no clue what I gave them. And so now it's like, oh, well, let's open it. That's a surprise for both of us. Yay!
Exactly. So you get some of the surprise. I love that. That's a fantastic idea. Oh, I'm gonna have to borrow that. That's amazing.
And so it's about finding the things that mean the most for you. And if you're trying to develop these relationships with the people around you, how to find the ways that how to use the ways that your ADHD has given you the strengths for. It's how to, like, you got to find those different ways. But the other side of that coin is also understanding your limitations. And that's the other part of my life coaching business is having understanding what your limitations are, so you can communicate to the people around you. Not just in the relationships with your spouse, but also the relationships with your family and the relationships with your work, and being an advocate for yourself across all of those different people that you deal with in your lives. And so then we work out the system of how you explain your depression issues to your boss. How do you explain your ADHD to your boss? How do you explain the imposter syndrome, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and really be an advocate for yourself to the people around you? How do you explain that stuff to your spouse and your partners? Like, how do you get them to understand that so that they don't have these unrealistic expectations of how you are at one point, and then try to continue that on through the rest of the things. So being honest up front, like, hey, in 6 months my brain's probably going to change, and it doesn't mean I don't love you any less or don't care about you any less, but my brain will change how I treat you. And if we can be honest and upfront about it, we can then, like, develop this expectation of, in 6 months, we can sit here and talk about that. And if you have questions about, hey, I'm not getting the attention that I used to get from you, you can sit here and say, all right, so we talked about this before, and this is what this means. And then we have to shift our relationship. Are you still willing to pay the price of admission? Right. And that's how the relationships keep going longer and longer, right? Like the person decides that that point they decide to keep paying for the price of admission, and the relationship adapts and changes a little bit. And the same thing goes through with your boss, right? You get to a point where you're having a hard time, and you've talked to your boss and you've talked to your HR department, and they start kind of seeing a little bit drop off in your attendance, or they start kind of seeing your performance isn't as great. They don't think that you're just some oh, you're just some fuck up or something like that. They know that you've talked to them about your ADHD, you've talked to them about your depression, you've talked to them about your the different mental issues that you deal with. And just like if you were missing an arm or only had one eye, or like you've communicated these things to them. And so now it's just, instead of having a sit down and talking about how slacking your performance, they can sit here and say, hey, we talked about this before. Are you starting to go through that thing that we talked about where you're bored with what you're working on? Do we need to switch you to a different project? Do we need to work with you on a different schedule? Do you need to work from home for a short amount of time? Do you need some time off and things like that? Now, this is hard in America because our work, our careers and things like that, our bosses are assholes a lot of times. But the more that you normalize discussing with your managers and discussing with HR what you are going through, the more we normalize that, the faster businesses start to understand it.
And the
And
more
the
they're
more,
going to understand themselves, right? The more they're
right.
going to actually have empathy for you and recognize, and maybe even have some history themselves. I know for me in my, it was funny because I would always be too afraid to talk about my ADHD. But when I got sober, I had no problem going into a job interview, telling the chef, I'm an alcoholic. I'm not going to work nights. This is what I can do for you. When I feel that I'm unsafe, I'm going to let you know. I go through depression, and I almost did it at a point of like, I want you to not give me the job. But it's also like, I'd rather get to that no as fast as possible. If you don't think we're going to be a fit, then I don't want to waste my time anymore, because I don't want to waste my time on a job that isn't going to fulfill my needs. Because when I go into an interview now, I don't have them interview me. I interview them. Are you a fit for me? I try to flip it around as much as possible of like, all right, can you work for me? What can we do? And this is what I can give you if you can give me the things of the things that I need to make sure that I succeed. And if you do that, you're going to be amazed. Because like it was one in particular one was I worked at the Radisson Blue Hotel in Dublin as the breakfast chef. And I was like, look, and he's like, sometimes they're going to ask you to work nights. I'm like, look, if I'm getting up at 5:30 in the morning, like putting me in that kind of nighttime, anytime you put me in that nighttime schedule, I fall into bad patterns and I can't do that. And he tried to get me to do nights a couple of times. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. And I walked away from the job. And I just said, no, like, that's not like, I can't, those aren't things that I'm unwilling to do. And having the boundaries to walk away. And it's scary because you're like, oh, what about money? I'm like, I'm confident enough in my own culinary skills that I could go get another job. But it's not necessarily, but it's like, I'm not going to go take a job that I'm going to be unhappy in, because if I'm going to spend 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day doing a thing, I want to be enjoying it and passionate about it. Otherwise, like my ADHD won't, like, I will be a miserable fuck and you don't want me there.
Like, right, it's about the boundaries that you put in place. It's about the communication of what you deal with. It's about understanding your limitations and your strengths and working towards creating that environment where you thrive. And that's how you deal with ADHD, is how you build the environment around yourself and who you allow in your life, and eliminating as much stress and trauma and abuse and these things that cause us to really break down and not function. like once you start building that environment of trust and communication and honesty around yourselves in each aspect of your life and your business and your relationships and your with your children and your friendships, once you start building that environment, that's when you really start to move forward, and that's when you start to really move up, and you start to really build the self-love and start to be able to fight against imposter syndrome, fight against the rejection sensitivity. That's when you start having these people who are helping affirm you for who you are authentically. That's where we start to see the improvements in people's lives. But you have to create the environment. And until you do that, then you're not going to be happy.
Boom, that was a mic drop right there. Mic drop. I wish I had a microphone. I would drop it. Wow, that was...
Nope, that's a...
That was absolutely amazing. We're getting kind of close to the end of the hour here. So just on the last little 5 minutes there, what's your biggest kind of tip for someone, actually, let me rephrase this. So, because we talked a lot of things. So to recap here, so like, what would you say is your biggest kind of takeaway that you would want to give someone who's watching this, who's struggling with ADHD? What would be your biggest kind of hot mic like take?
I feel like I just said it. Honestly, no. Like, it's all about your environment, and I'm going to reiterate this. It's all about the environment. If you can, get a psychiatrist. If you can, get a therapist and work with them and let them know that you have ADHD. Let them diagnose you if you think you have ADHD but aren't diagnosed, and then go through the process with them. And it's going to suck for a little while. You're going to have to process through the different medications, and that's just a process. And that's what our support group is for. That's what your therapist is for, is to kind of keep communicating that thing. And then it's about building that environment around you that everybody understands what you're going through. Everybody understands your limitations. Everybody around you understands your strengths. And then everybody needs to work with you. And anybody who comes into your environment needs to understand that this environment is trust, communication, honesty. I can come to you and tell you anything about myself, and I expect you to be able to come to me and tell me anything about yourself, and I'm not going to ever judge you for what you're dealing with, and I don't expect to be judged by you. I will not accept abuse towards me. I will not accept abuse towards my kids. I will not accept abuse towards those I love, right? And putting those boundaries in place and building that environment around yourself, that's where you really do start to thrive. That's where you do start to get the healing that you need. And that's where you start to build the ability to start using the resilience that you've gained over years and years of trauma and pain. And, don't be afraid to put people out of your life that are abusing you, that refuse to work with you, that refuse to acknowledge your ADHD as an issue, that refuse to acknowledge your mental health as important. Get them out of your life as fast as possible. And that may suck for a short time. I understand that, but it will suck less than being with that person in your life for 10 years. It will suck less than seeing your children traumatized by the pain that you're dealing with and the pain that's being caused. Like, get those people out of your life. I don't care if it's your spouse. I don't care if it's your father, mother, siblings, anybody who's causing you trauma and abuse, who are putting you down constantly, who will not work with you, who will not listen to you, who will not communicate with you. Get them out of your life.
That's amazing. Love it, Shane. Absolutely love it. One last thing. So if someone would love to work with you or get a hold of you, how would they be able to do that?
You can find me on my website is www.creatingorderfromchaos.com. You can find me on Facebook at Creating Order from Chaos Coaching, and you can find me on various podcasts that I post on my website and all my social media.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shane. Thank you for taking the time out to talk with me today, for being my very first get to know an admin moderator for the ADHD Men's Support Group. If you love this, don't forget to give it a like and give some love to Shane there as well. I appreciate you all for watching this, and very good, yay. I wish you all a great, if not better, day.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks.